The Great Hall of the Xylos Confederacy was a cathedral of silence. It was carved from the heart of a dead moon, a cavern so vast that its obsidian walls receded into an impenetrable gloom, lost to the naked eye. The only light came from thousands of hovering bioluminescent orbs, their cold blue light reflecting off the polished chitin of 1,000 assembled delegates. They were the apex species of 100 star systems, and they had gathered to witness a formality, the absorption of a minor, insignificant race into their grand dominion. At the far end of the hall, on a dais of pure, crystallized energy, sat the sovereign. His form was immense, a creature of dense, chitinous armor and countless jointed limbs. He was ancient, his consciousness having guided the Xylos for over 1,000 of their years. He did not speak. His thoughts were projected directly into the minds of every being present, a psychic pressure that felt like a weight upon the soul. The primitive species from the Sol system has been notified of our terms, the sovereign's thought boomed, devoid of emotion. Their technology is rudimentary, their bodies fragile, their lives fleeting. They possess nothing of value to the Confederacy. Their choice is simple: peaceful assimilation or oblivion. A murmur of psychic agreement rippled through the hall. To the delegates, this was beneath them. Humanity was a curiosity, a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, and even then with clunky, inefficient drives that took months to traverse the space a Xylos warship could cross in days. They were loud, emotional, and illogical. They were, in the grand lexicon of the galaxy, insignificant. A portal shimmered at the base of the dais. Through it stepped a single human. He was of average height with unremarkable features, dressed in a simple, functional uniform of dark blue. He had no entourage, no weapons, no visible displays of power. He was just a man, standing alone before the combined might of a galactic empire. His name was Elias Vance, and he was an ambassador from Earth. The delegates stirred, a wave of condescending amusement washing through the hall. His very biological functions were a cacophony to their refined senses. They could perceive the steady thump of his heart, the electrical impulses of his simplistic brain, the quiet hiss of air entering and leaving his lungs. He was so terribly, terribly fragile. One of the delegates, a tall, slender being with multiple eyes on flexible stalks, leaned forward. It was Ambassador Drawl of the Sycorax, a species known for their artistic temperament and their disdain for anything they considered unrefined. "It breathes," Drawl's voice was a silken, whispered translation of his thought. "It stands there, and it breathes, as if the act of respiration is a negotiation tactic, charming in a primitive, larval sort of way." Another delegate, a hulking quadrupedal being with a carapace like forged steel, rumbled a thought. "Where are its weapons? Its armor? Does it not understand it stands before the sovereign?" This was a war master of the Cathar, a species that respected only strength and martial prowess. To him, the human's apparent defenselessness was an insult. Elias stood perfectly still, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He observed the towering forms, the alien geometries, the psychic murmurings he could not hear but could certainly feel as a palpable tension in the air. He had been briefed. He knew the power of the Xylos. He knew the statistical probability of humanity's survival in a conflict was near zero. He knew all of this, and yet his face betrayed no fear, only a calm, focused attention. The sovereign's psychic voice descended upon Elias. It was not a sound, but a direct intrusion into his mind, a cold and probing tendril of consciousness. "Human, you are here to receive your fate. Your species will be granted protectorate status. You will cede control of your military, your spacefaring capabilities, and your primary resource extraction. In return, you will be permitted to exist on your home world, unbothered by the wider galaxy. Do you accept these terms?" The ultimatum hung in the air. The delegates leaned forward, eager to hear the pathetic pleas for mercy, the trembling acceptance. They had seen it 1,000 times. The weaker species always broke. Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. He looked up, not at any one delegate, but directly at the immense, shadowy form of the sovereign. When he spoke, his voice was not projected psychically. It was a simple, human voice that carried in the vast hall only because of the absolute silence. It was the voice of a man used to being heard. "I have a counteroffer," he said. A wave of psychic shock, akin to static, crackled through the hall. A counteroffer? The insolence! The Cathar War Master stamped a heavy claw, cracking the stone floor. Drawl's eye stalks recoiled as if struck. This was unprecedented. This was madness. The Sovereign's presence pressed down harder, a psychic storm of annoyance. "There is no negotiation, human. You misunderstand your position. You are not a power to be bargained with. You are a variable to be accounted for. Your counter-offer is meaningless." Elias didn't flinch. He could feel the pressure, a headache blooming behind his eyes, but he had faced down angry world leaders, volatile negotiations, and the crushing loneliness of deep space. This was just another kind of pressure. "My counteroffer is simple," he continued, his voice unwavering. "You leave our systems. You forget you ever found us. You return to your side of the galaxy, and we will stay on ours." For a moment there was absolute, stunned silence. Then, a sound that had never been heard in the Great Hall before. Laughter. Not vocal, but psychic. A wave of mirth, condescending and cruel, washed from the delegates. It was the laughter of gods mocking an ant that had dared to challenge them. Drawl's thoughts were a cascade of delighted scorn. "It negotiates! It actually believes it has leverage! Oh, this is priceless! The Sovereign should keep it as a pet, a court jester to amuse us." The War Master's thoughts were a rumble of contemptuous amusement. A brave little insect. It has no fleet, no weapons, and it threatens us. Its ignorance of its own insignificance is almost admirable. The laughter grew, a psychic cacophony of 1,000 superior beings finding humor in the folly of a lesser creature. They projected images into the shared space, images of humanity's clunky ships being swatted aside, of their cities burning, of them scurrying back to their caves. They showed Elias his own insignificance. Through it all, Elias stood firm. He let the wave of psychic mockery wash over him. He didn't try to block it out. He let them show him their worst. He saw their weapons, their fleets, their power. And when the storm of their amusement began to die down, replaced by a bored contempt, he spoke again. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the fading laughter like a blade. "You find us amusing." Drawl's eye stalks swiveled back to the human. "Profoundly so, little creature. You are a child playing at war, armed with a stick, threatening a star." Elias looked directly at Drawl, then slowly swept his gaze across the assembly, finally settling on the immense silhouette of the Sovereign. He stood a little straighter. The calm on his face did not break. It simply hardened. It became something ancient, something that had nothing to do with spaceships or psychic powers. It was the look of a species that had clawed its way up from the mud, that had faced ice ages, predators, and its own bottomless capacity for self-destruction, and had survived. It was the look of a species that had learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not size, or strength, or psychic might. It was the will to endure. He opened his mouth, and the two words he spoke were not shouted. They were not a threat. They were a simple, terrifyingly calm statement of fact. An invitation. A challenge. "Test me." The two words hung in the air, a simple utterance that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence. The psychic laughter ceased instantly. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The condescending amusement in the minds of the delegates was replaced not by anger, but by a cold, analytical confusion. Test me. What manner of species, when shown the vastness of a galactic empire's power, when faced with absolute annihilation, responds with a challenge? This was not the logic of a survivor. This was not the bluster of a fool. This was something else entirely. It was the quiet confidence of a being that knew something they did not. The sovereign's psychic presence, which had been a field of cold authority, shifted. A new sensation entered the collective consciousness of the hall. It was curiosity, and it was tinged with the first faint flicker of something the Xylos sovereign had not felt in a millennium: uncertainty. You would invite destruction, the sovereign's thought probed, but it was less a boom and more of a whisper, a test of its own. Elias held the sovereign's gaze, though he had no idea where the creature's eyes truly were. "No," he said simply. "I'm inviting you to try." The human delegation back on Earth, watching the feed through a light-delayed satellite, held their breath. The admiral of the fleet, a grizzled woman named Grace Tanaka, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had argued against this. She had said it was suicide. But the ambassador had simply smiled that same calm smile and said, "They don't know us, Admiral. Let's keep it that way for as long as we can." In the Great Hall, the Cathar War Master was the first to react. His species understood challenge. It was the bedrock of their existence, and this frail human had just issued one to the entire Confederacy. His psychic voice was a growl of predatory interest. "The little insect has a sting. Let me crush it, Sovereign. Let me show its kind the price of impertinence." Other voices joined in, a chorus of outrage and a newfound unsettling curiosity. Drawl, however, was silent. His artist's mind was racing. He was replaying the human's posture, his voice, his eyes. He saw no fear. He saw no bravado. He saw the absolute, unshakable calm of a predator who had just allowed itself to be underestimated. It was a terrifying realization. The sovereign raised a single massive limb, and the psychic murmuring ceased. All attention was fixed on the ancient being and the small, fragile human who stood before him. "Explain your confidence," the sovereign commanded, his thought now devoid of all emotion, a flat, analytical probe. "Your fleet is insignificant. Your weapons are primitive. Your worlds are undefended. By every measurable metric, you are weaker. What do you know that we do not?" This was the question. This was the fulcrum upon which the fate of humanity would balance. Elias could lie, could bluff about hidden fleets and superweapons. But lies could be seen through, bluffs could be called. The Xylos were not fools. They would dissect his words, his micro-expressions, his biological signs for any trace of deception. A lie would be the end. So he told them the truth. "I know what we are," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly in the vast space. "You see a species that has had FTL travel for 100 years. You see our clumsy ships and our short lives, and you think you understand us. You don't." He took a step forward, just one. But it was a step towards them, not away. It was an act of aggression so subtle yet so profound that several delegates actually recoiled. "You see a species that's peaceful because we came to you with an ambassador instead of a warship. You're wrong. We didn't send a warship because we don't have one that could reach you in time. But that doesn't make us peaceful." He let that sink in. He thought of humanity's history, a tapestry woven with threads of brilliant art and compassion, but also with the darkest, most violent war imaginable. A war that had been fought not against aliens, but against themselves. A war that had nearly scoured the planet clean. "Our history," he continued, "is not one of peaceful coexistence. It is a chronicle of conflict. We fought with sticks and stones, with swords and spears, with guns and bombs. We fought over land, over resources, over ideas, over the color of a flag. We fought until we had invented weapons capable of erasing our entire species from the face of our own planet. And then we built them, and we pointed them at each other." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The psychic silence in the hall was absolute. "Did you know," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "that the primary energy source for our civilization, the thing that powers our cities and our ships, is the same process we used to create our first world-ending weapons? We learned to harness the power of a star, to rip it apart, and we used that knowledge to build bombs first. Reactors came later. Fear came first. The capacity for total self-annihilation was our constant companion for over 70 years. He looked at the Cathar War Master. You respect strength. You understand war. So understand this. We are a species that spent our entire adolescence with a gun to our own head. We learned to live with the trigger a hair's breadth from being pulled. We made it a part of who we are. It shaped our politics, our art, our very psyche. The threat of extinction is not a new or terrifying concept to us, War Master. It is our oldest companion. He turned to drawl. You find us crude, unrefined. You're right, we are. We are a species born of fire and catastrophe. We are the thing that crawls out of the wreckage. We are the survivors of our own apocalypse. You see a fragile body, but you cannot see what's inside it. You cannot see the countless generations of ancestors who stared into the abyss and refused to blink. You cannot see the inherited, stubborn, illogical refusal to simply lie down and die. Finally, he looked back at the Sovereign. So when you ask why I am confident, I will tell you. It is not because I have a hidden fleet. It is not because we have a weapon you cannot counter. It is because I know that if you push us, if you force us to that final edge, we will not break. We have been on that edge before. We know what is there, and we are not afraid of it. He spread his hands, a gesture of openness, of finality. So I will say it one last time, and I will not say it again. Leave us be. The galaxy is vast. There is room for all of us. But if you cannot find it in yourselves to do that, if your pride or your greed or your fear demands that we be brought to heel, then you must be willing to accept the consequences. You must be willing to test a theory with the lives of your own people. You must be willing to find out definitively whether a species that has spent its entire existence preparing for its own end can be intimidated by the threat of it. He fell silent. The hall was a tomb. The psychic noise was gone. There was only the slow, steady rhythm of one human heart beating in the dark. The Sovereign was silent for a long, long time. The other delegates were frozen, their ancient minds struggling to process the paradigm shift. They had come here to absorb a minor species. They had instead found a mirror, and in it, they saw a reflection of something they had not expected. A version of themselves, but younger, more volatile, and utterly, terrifyingly unafraid of the dark. They saw a species that had not built its civilization on the ruins of others, but on the ashes of its own potential for self-destruction. They were not a race of builders who had learned to fight. They were a race of fighters who had, for a brief moment, learned to build. And that fight, that core of defiant survival, was not something that could be conquered by a fleet. The Sovereign's psychic voice returned, but it was different. It was quiet, thoughtful. It was the voice of an ancient being reevaluating a fundamental truth. You would rather die than submit? Elias shook his head slowly. No, Sovereign. That's the point you're still missing. We would rather you die than submit. That is the difference. You see a choice between life and death. We don't. We see a choice between your death and our death. And if you force that choice upon us, we will fight with everything we have, for as long as we have, to make sure it's yours. Not out of malice, not out of bravery, but because that is what we do. It's what we've always done. It is the only thing we have ever been truly, universally good at. The silence stretched on. An eternity passed in the space between heartbeats. The fate of two civilizations hung on the next thought of an alien sovereign. Finally, the Sovereign moved. His immense form shifted on his dais of energy. When his thought came, it was not directed at the assembly. It was a private message for Elias alone. Your species is dangerous. Elias met the ancient being's unseen gaze. We know. Another long pause. Then the Sovereign's thought boomed through the hall once more, but this time it was not a projection of power but a formal declaration. The human ambassador has spoken. His words have been considered. The proposal to absorb the Sol system is withdrawn. The Xylos Confederacy acknowledges the sovereignty of the human species. Their space is declared off-limits. Any vessel entering their territory without explicit invitation will be considered hostile and will be dealt with by the humans, according to their own customs. A wave of psychic shock, genuine and profound, rippled through the delegates. Drawl's eye stalks went limp. The Cathar War Master stared, his massive jaw hanging open. They could not believe what they had just heard. The sovereign had backed down. The invincible, eternal sovereign had been challenged. And he had blinked. No, that wasn't right. He hadn't blinked. He had made a calculated decision. He had looked into the eyes of a predator disguised as prey and had chosen not to test its bite. He had seen the truth in the human's words. He had seen that humanity was not a resource to be exploited, but a force of nature to be respected, or at the very least, avoided. The sovereign's final thought was for Elias alone, a whisper of ancient wisdom. Go home, human, and pray that your kind never has a reason to look our way again, for both our sakes. The portal shimmered back to life behind Elias. He gave one last, slow nod towards the sovereign. Then he turned, and without a backward glance at the stunned assembly of 1,000 mighty races, he walked back through the portal and vanished from the great hall. He emerged in the sterile white room of the human observation post on a barren moon at the edge of the solar system. Admiral Tanaka was there, her face pale, her eyes wide. The technicians were staring at their screens in disbelief. What just happened?" she whispered. Elias Vance, ambassador of Earth, let out a long, slow breath. The calm mask finally slipped, and for just a moment, sheer, unadulterated exhaustion was visible on his face. He ran a hand through his hair and looked at the Admiral. "I think," he said, his voice rough, "I just called a bluff that wasn't a bluff, and they believed me." He walked to a small view screen that showed the blue and green jewel of Earth hanging in the vast darkness of space. He stared at it for a long moment. "Let's hope," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, "that we never have to prove them wrong." Back in the Great Hall of the Xylos Confederacy, the delegates dispersed in a stunned and confused silence. The legend of the human ambassador would spread through the Confederacy like wildfire. The story of the fragile, short-lived creature who had stood before the sovereign and spoken 2 words that had changed the course of history. "Test me." And the sovereign, alone in his vast chamber, pondered a new and unsettling truth he had learned that day. True power, he realized, was not in the size of a fleet or the strength of a psychic projection. True power was the will to use it, even when all hope was lost. It was the quiet certainty of a species that had already faced its own demons and had chosen to live with them. It was the look in a small, fragile human's eyes when he invited the mightiest empire in the known galaxy to do its worst. It was, he decided, a look he never wished to see again.